Thanks, Lascan Corla. Well, probably like other deputies, just before considering this bill, I was just looking at the latest figures. I think Deputy Ring might have, or Minister Ring referred to them earlier on, the latest horrendous death and casualty figures on our roads. And I think as of now it stands at 188 deaths for 2014, and at this time last year there was 181, and with 40 pedestrians and 11 cyclists having been killed. These are really shocking statistics, Lascan, because clearly if we had a disaster, say, and 188 people died, say from air transport or train transport or whatever, this House would be talking about it for weeks, and we'd have a public inquiry, we'd have major action, and yet year in, year out, unfortunately, it seems to be acceptable that we have these kind of casualties. And it has to be said, Minister, on your watch and Minister Varadkar's watch, the situation has deteriorated in terms of casualties. And I think we've got to, with the new chairperson, the former Deputy O'Donnell, and the new Chief Executive of RSA, I think we've got to try and get these numbers coming down seriously, because it's just horrendous. And again, when you think, and I'll refer to it later on, I mean, when you think of the, again, terrible impacts that have resulted on families and friends of each one of those 188 people, and indeed, of course, other people who are seriously injured. So I think that's the thing to bear in mind when we look at the bill today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to the debate. Of course, in a way, it shouldn't be happening at all. We shouldn't have needed to have this debate, because we're meeting in an emergency session effectively to correct lacuna in the road traffic law. And the legislation, of course, should have been right from the very start. And this, Minister, you do have responsibility to this House for that fact. That you're directly responsible to us in relation to having to correct these two matters today. And even indeed if Minister Varadkar, and I think Minister Dempsey before him, also bear heavy responsibility for this legislation having to be taken. That being said, of course, we're now in the situation we're in, Lascan, and I do support the bill before us, because I think it's, again, offering important protection for our road users. As I understand it, Lascan Corla, it addresses two loopholes in road traffic legislation as it relates to the penalty points system. The first, of course, concerns the validity of penalty points for the offences of using a vehicle without a valid NCT and parking in a dangerous position. And I note that the Minister's intention is for Section 2 of the Road Traffic No.2 Bill 2014 to correct references in road traffic legislation about the applicability and endorsement of penalty points for those offences. As far as I understand it, it also seeks to ensure that these offences, which are now fixed charge offences, are deleted from a list of exemptions of offences upon which driving licence would be endorsed with penalty points upon payment of a fixed charge. So Section 2.1 of the 2002 Act, as I understand, will be amended effectively to delete references to the two offences above as being exempted. These, of course, are very important in the first gap that we're correcting. The two very important offences, I think the recent flurry of people applying for NCTs seems to highlight this. Now, I have some sympathy for the cases outlined by Deputy Mulherin and Deputy Penrose in relation to how they operate. In your case and mine, I think, Minister, we probably have the Ballymun facility, which operates in an efficient way. But people have been saying, for example, that they'd like to be able to have their NCT, say, before the 3-month period, so that even this idea, which I think Deputy Penrose is right, that if you've made a genuine attempt to try and get your NCT, that should be a proof that you're trying to have the test carried out. So I think that's an area the Minister could look at very seriously and see how we could make it more efficient, particularly allowing people maybe to have an early NCT. The second loop, the other issue, of course, parking in dangerous places. Well, I think any of us as councillors before being TDs and TDs, we'd have a lot of that type of issue coming up outside supermarkets and outside schools and so on. So it's important that's also remedied. The second loophole, of course, relates to correcting the effect of Section 8 B1 of the Road Traffic Act 2014, because this amended Section 2.1 of the Road Traffic Act 2002 and made reference to Sections 37 and 44 of the Road Traffic Act 2010 in substitution for Section 103 of the Road Traffic Act 1961. But because those sections of the 2010 Act have not yet been commenced, Minister, the endorsement of penalty points upon payment of a fixed charge would not be valid. Again, I welcome the legislation, Lascan, in correcting these loopholes, but I must reiterate my strong concerns about this, because we shouldn't be here again correcting it, this legislation. I understand the loopholes came to light during a High Court challenge by a motorist who'd received a number of penalty points, and when an inquiry was made about the endorsement of those points by this motorist solicitor, it transpired the legislation was defective or infirm. I note that the second loophole which the Minister seeks to address in the bill specifically refers to Section 44 of the Road Traffic Act 2010. Now, as the Minister is well aware, I've called for the enactment of Section 44, which provides for the so-called third payment option. Indeed, I've called for a number of times in the media and so on. And under this mechanism, a person who is served with a summons for a fixed charge offence will have a final opportunity to pay a fixed charge of an amount 100% greater than the original penalty, not later than 7 days before the court date on which the charge is to be heard. Now, as the Minister is also aware, the Park Road Safety Group, led, of course, brilliantly by that great citizen and great road traffic activist, safety activist, Ms Susan Gray from Donegal. She and her committee have been consistently campaigning for the enactment of Section 44, and I understand that Park, they've raised this matter, Minister, with you personally. I also understand the Minister's predecessor, Minister Varadkar, and the Minister for Justice and Equality, Francis Fitzgerald, Deputy Fitzgerald, met with members of Park in June of this year and committed to enacting Section 44, and further informed that making Section 44 operational requires the allocation of resources to Garda Síochána to update their IT systems to recognise the creation of a new structure in the penalty point system. I was told, in fact, Minister, that I think at one of your meetings with Park in September that this multi-stakeholder group with the Department of Justice that was getting together, that at that stage €6 million was to be provided to update the Garda IT systems. And this has been asked about for many months. The courts also needed to update their systems. I understand they were more, if you like, quicker off the blocks in doing that, but that there's some issues still in relation to the Garda system. So if the necessary resources are available, they now need to be drawn down. You need to see, Minister, that they're drawn down. This should allow for the system to be updated. However, it appears that there are further delays in making these necessary changes, as I've said. So I'd like for the Minister to explain the reasons about Section 44 in his response this afternoon. You remember, Minister, as well, that Mr Bob Olson of the Garda Inspectorate, he issued this major report for the government on fixed charge processing, and he highlighted this Section 44 as one of the elements that you were to deal with. It's also often been said to me, of course, Minister, by citizens is why aren't fixed charges delivered by registered post? Deputy Penrose was there, I think, brilliantly outlining why we need common sense, plainly written legislation, steeped in common sense. And of course, lots of citizens, instead of this rigmarole in court, and if you do the offence, you should take the points and get on with your, and improve your driving. That's the whole idea of penalty points. So why could we not have registered post? That there be no question about fixed charges notices being delivered. And again, it seems bizarre that approach wasn't taken. So the problem with the road traffic legislation, which the Minister is now attempting to rectify, again highlights the need, as our barrister colleague, Deputy Penrose, said, for a consolidated road traffic act. And I think you referred to that, Minister, in your introductory remarks. I wasn't able to be here. Because so many times over recent decades because of the complexity of road traffic legislation, and even when I was going through a few of the acts there, everyone knows it's so complex. It's very easily open to challenge by an intelligence solicitor or whatever in a court situation, and that's also a factor, I think, in the ongoing unacceptable level of bad driving and then ultimately deaths and casualties on Irish road. On numerous numerous occasions in this Dáil, including my time as transport spokesperson for the Labour Party over a number of years, I asked for consolidation of road traffic legislation. So the current situation where there are large number of road traffic acts back to 1961, I think we're referring to in the supplementary documents you gave us, Minister, it's just too complicated and messy. Makes it very difficult for us as legislators, as policymakers for the future, and then as practitioners in the courts, and indeed for the ordinary citizens to understand. So there's unnecessary complexity in that legislation as it stands. One initiative, of course, I do want to commend Minister Donoghue on, which I think you've taken since you have taken up this portfolio, is a proposal which I've also advocated in many years in my time on Dublin City Council and as transport spokesman in this House. And the last deputy was referring to the Pale and people outside the Pale and so on and so forth. I'm one of those like him who comes from a county council cottage, but we also had cattle, and I'm a country dub, Minister, and I know, as this man knows very well, he represents my native land. And yeah, I totally understand. I can see both sides of it. In fact, I don't see, we did a long speech last night by somebody, if you like, comparing and setting up our cities against our country areas. Like, to me, that's pointless politics. Like, we're all people wherever we live, and if you're like myself with a rural background representing an urban area, living in an urban area, I think you represent everybody. And I expect, no matter where you live in this country, it's a fundamental thesis, I think, of certainly social democracy and socialism. No matter where you live in this country, you should get exactly the same level of services, exactly the same. And that's why I certainly don't begrudge Westport United in any way, not for a single cent, for that brilliant town in your constituency, which I know quite well. Yes, exactly. So one initiative, of course, as I said, which you have brought forward, Minister, is this idea of having a special speed limit in estates in urban settings. When we were pursuing it about 15 years ago, when I was the leader of the Rainbow Civic Alliance Dublin City Council, and in the fortunate position, of course, the Labour Party was the biggest party and Fine Gael was a smaller party. But in those circumstances, we were pursuing what we called home zones. And a home zone, I think it was based on a Dutch model, was whereby when you went into the urban estate, you dropped your speed. We were aiming at 25 miles an hour. I think you're going for the 25 kph, and I'd agree with that also. And I think it's a very useful initiative. Now, obviously, we brought it forward. We floundered with the, if you like, the lack of activity, the lethargic approach of the Department of Environment in those days, and later on the Department of Transport. We couldn't get it through. But certainly, if you look at, estates in my constituency, areas like Marino, Dooney-Carney, Edenmore, Clonshock, Newbury, or whatever, in Dublin Bay, North constituency, you come in off the main road, off the main street, and you're into then a residential area with seniors, with children, with families going and walking around doing their ordinary business, and you got to slow down immediately. So I would like to see more on street, written on the street, not small signs, but on the street in front of you, signage given the home zone speed limit. So if the Minister brings that forward, I think that would be a very useful contribution, Minister, from the period for urban Ireland anyway, and all the Irish towns indeed, be a very useful contribution to the protection of life, given the number of pedestrians there, for example, and so on. So I wish you well on that, and I hope it happens. On the general issue also of road traffic legislation, I presume you'll do that in a future road traffic bill as part of, I'm not sure if you can do it unilaterally under regulations. If you can, I look forward to that. On the general issue of road traffic legislation, I'd also like to refer to a series of 4 articles, maybe other deputies refer to it, written by the Irish Times journalist Peter Murtagh over recent months. These articles, they're called Anatomy of a Car Crash in 4 parts, and they refer to a terrible crash that happened on the very first day of 2014. In an outstanding piece of journalism, Mr. Peter Murtagh, he analyses all aspects of that disaster because it resulted in the deaths of 2 men, and obviously horrendous sadness and impact on their families and all of their friends. He refers to this, by the way, as the ripple effect on on the whole surrounding and close-knit communities around those two men. And it kind of brings home to you in a very vivid way the disaster of one terrible crash and two families, two communities ripped apart. He also covers, of course, in his report, he goes down through the different elements of it, and he covers, of course, the actual inquest, I think, itself, which occurred in October of this year. And when you're reading it, I'm familiar with from the Minister's Department. In fact, I was one of those people who campaigned. I was also Marine spokesman of the Labour Party for many, many years, for the fact that we now have, we have from the Marine Safety Division, Marine Transport, those reports on disasters at sea, when somebody is lost at sea, or where there's a serious problem, people get seriously injured. And the Minister sends us up, we used to get the hard copy, you send us up now, the reports of each and every single incident. And looking at the Murta document, the Irish Times, that wonderful piece of journalism by the Irish Times and by Peter Murtaugh, it makes you think that it would be very interesting if we had a full report for the whole community for this Dáil on every single crash where somebody is killed, where somebody is seriously injured. That would be a very, obviously, take major resources, so on, but I think it would be very important. It's something to think about. How could we, to bring home to us, as I said, 188, it's just a number. If people had died together, there would be a public inquiry, there would be a major report, and so on. So I think to treat every single one of those deaths as a major disaster, which it is for our country, for our citizenry, as well as for the close connection. So again, that's something maybe the Minister, he might reflect on and see if there's some way we could go forward on that. The other couple of points I just wanted to ask you briefly. So, as I said, I'm supportive of the legislation in front of us. Just is in relation to what you're doing in relation to texting, Minister. I think it was texting was the Road Traffic Act of 2006 restriction on the use of mobile phones. Created the offence of accessing data on a mobile telephone while driving, or texting while driving. Now, I asked Minister Fitzgerald for what data on that, on texting, and the way it's still very upsetting for all of us. If you're hopefully driving safely, either on the motorway and anywhere around the country or in the city, and you see somebody talking away there on the phone, maybe driving slightly erratically or whatever. So you couldn't, Minister Fitzgerald anyway, couldn't provide me with the data on it, on that particular issue, Minister. She said the court service indicated a new offence code was updated to the relevant IT systems on 7th of December, consistent with normal reporting procedure. It will be a number of months before any meaningful data can be provided. So that's something that's got great interest again to citizens who also recognise that mobile phone use and texting is an important problem. I note, by the way, that you've indicated that you're going to move in relation to drug testing, and that I used to be constantly talking to your predecessor about the possibility of introducing the systems they have in states like Victoria, New South Wales and Australia for trying to identify drug usage, because clearly we know that in so many crashes that has been a factor, and the always reply was, well, there's no adequate testing except for the initial, if you like, legislation that we brought in recently. And I just wanted to ask you also in relation to the supply of data from the NVDF to insurance companies, which is another important element, I think, of creating a regime. You said, for example, that yesterday, I think was it yourself, or was it the other? It was yourself. Yeah, you told me that yesterday, the 17th of December 2014, you said of one insurance company that the system would start with one insurance company, and this relates to the fact, obviously, that if you have a track record, if you have a bad record and you haven't been behaving properly as a driver, you haven't changed your driving and brought your driving into a much better mode, that this will be on your record in terms of insurance. So it's another safeguard for the driving public. So in conclusion, Lascan, again, I'd welcome the bill. It's unfortunate we have to be doing this, and perhaps Minister might again have a stab. I know the government may not have that long to go. Have a stab at least putting in place place some sort of process whereby we can have consolidated traffic legislation, and as Deputy Penrose said again so eloquently, that's something that we could all understand and adhere to. And then if you maybe also have a look at, as I said, welcome the home zones, and have a look at the reporting system for terrible crashes. Thanks, Ken.
Next speaker is Deputy Robert Dowds. Are you sharing time, Deputy?
I'm not sure.